What if I told you that one of the greatest miracles in the Bible happened after a prophet's death? A lifeless body, no breath left, and yet it revived another. This is the true story of Elisha, a prophet whose miracles didn't stop at death. Elisha, the prophet who succeeded Elijah, performed more miracles than anyone in the Old Testament. But what makes his story truly extraordinary is that his miracles didn't stop when he died. Even in the grave, he kept giving life. Elisha's journey takes us from his humble beginnings to his powerful legacy. We'll explore the miracles he performed, his unwavering faith, and how God used him to impact lives, even long after his death. Let's dive into the extraordinary life of a prophet whose story continues to inspire. 1. The call in the field. From ordinary to prophet, Elisha was plowing fields, going about his daily work when God called him through the prophet Elijah. At that time, Israel was in turmoil, with people turning to false gods. Elijah had just been through a period of discouragement, believing he was the last faithful prophet. But God had a plan. He would raise up a successor from a humble, unassuming man in a field. Elisha, the son of Shaphat, was not a priest, not a ruler, but a farmer with no reputation of significance. Elisha's story is a powerful reminder that God does not choose us based on our status or position in society, but on our willingness to answer his call. God often calls the most unexpected people to carry out his work, just as he called Elisha to be his prophet. Elisha's response exemplified complete obedience and surrender, demonstrating that God values humility and readiness over earthly qualifications. How are we answering God's call in our lives? Often we may feel unqualified or insignificant, but Elisha's example shows us that God doesn't need perfect resumes. He needs hearts that are ready and willing to follow his lead. Whether you're at the workplace, in your community, or at home, how can you embrace your calling with the same humility and commitment that Elisha did, even when it seems daunting or unclear? 2. Elisha's unwavering faith. As Elisha's journey continued, the moment came when Elijah was about to be taken to heaven. Elijah, sensing the transition, tested Elisha's faith and loyalty 3 times, asking him to stay behind. But Elisha's response was unwavering. "As surely as the Lord lives, and as you live, I will not leave you." With each test, Elisha chose to stay by Elijah's side, refusing to let go of the calling that was now his. In those final moments, Elijah asked Elisha what he desired. Elisha's request was simple but profound. "Let me inherit a double portion of your spirit." This wasn't out of selfishness, but a deep understanding of the weight of the mission ahead of him. Elisha wasn't seeking power or prestige. He was asking for the strength to carry out God's will with greater faithfulness. Elisha's dedication to Elijah shows us what true faithfulness looks like. It's not about looking for the easy way out or asking for a comfortable journey, but about remaining committed to God's calling even when the road is tough. Sometimes we are called to follow God even when we don't fully understand what lies ahead. The loyalty Elisha demonstrated reminds us that faith is not just about moments of glory, but about staying committed in the quiet, unseen times. How often do we face moments where we are tested to see if we will stay true to our faith, especially when things are uncertain? Elisha shows us that real faith requires perseverance, a willingness to stay close to God even when the world around us seems to pull us in different directions. 3. The passing of the mantle, a double portion of power. As Elijah ascended to heaven in a chariot of fire, the sky parting in dramatic glory, Elisha stood as the witness to this magnificent departure. With Elijah gone, the mantle, the symbol of prophetic authority, fell to the ground. In that moment, Elisha picked it up, not just as a physical piece of cloth, but as a sign of his new role, a sacred calling that would shape the rest of his life. When Elijah was taken, Elisha had asked for a double portion of his spirit. This wasn't a request for power or fame, but for the strength to carry the weight of a prophet's responsibility. In asking for this double portion, Elisha was acknowledging that the work before him was vast and demanding. He understood that God's work requires not only faith, but the endurance to persist through trials and hardships. The significance of this moment wasn't just in the passing of the physical mantle, but in what it symbolized: the continuation of God's work, regardless of the vessel he chose to carry it. It wasn't about Elijah's glory or Elisha's ambition, but about God's mission being carried forward through faithful servants. Elisha's request for a double portion teaches us a powerful lesson about our own walk with God. It's easy to seek recognition or material blessings, but Elisha's example challenges us to desire a greater capacity to serve, to seek more of God's presence, power, and grace, so that we may be faithful stewards of His kingdom. Are we asking for God's Spirit not to advance our own agenda, but to serve others with greater humility and dedication? Just as Elisha received the mantle, we too are called to carry the responsibility of God's mission, sometimes quietly, often unseen, but always faithfully. 4. Elisha's first miracles and acts of mercy. After Elijah was taken up to heaven, Elisha began his ministry in a way that mirrored the compassionate heart of God. One of his first miracles took place in the city of Jericho. The residents came to him with a problem that seemed simple but was actually deeply significant. Their water supply was polluted, and the land had become unproductive. The beautiful city, which should have flourished, was dying from within. In response, Elisha didn't call for elaborate rituals or grand gestures. Instead, he asked for a new bowl and some salt. In a quiet moment of faith, he went to the source of the water and, with a simple act, threw the salt into the spring while proclaiming, "This is what the Lord says, I have healed this water. Never again will it cause death or make the land unproductive." The water was healed and the land became fertile once again. What seemed like a small act of mercy, using salt, had massive, far-reaching consequences for the people of Jericho. It wasn't about the salt itself, but about God's power working through Elisha's faith and obedience. The land that had once been barren was restored because Elisha was obedient to God's word, no matter how unusual or humble the task may have seemed. This miracle highlights something important. God cares deeply about our everyday needs, even the ones we might consider small or insignificant. Elisha's approach shows us that God is not always found in the grandeur of the moment, but in the quiet, humble acts of service that transform lives. Whether it's helping a neighbor, offering a prayer, or listening to someone in need, these simple acts are often the vehicles for God's greatest miracles. In our own lives, how can we take the ordinary moments and use them to serve God? Maybe it's in the way we serve others quietly, or in how we trust God with the seemingly small things. Elisha's story encourages us to see God's power in the most mundane aspects of life, and to trust that, with His blessing, even the most unlikely things can bring life and healing. 5. The widow's oil, a quiet miracle of provision. Elisha's life was full of miracles, but some of his most powerful acts were simple and quiet, like the one involving a widow in deep distress. This widow's husband had been a servant of God, but now he was dead, and the debts they owed were about to destroy her family. The creditors were coming to take her 2 sons as slaves, and she was desperate. With nothing left to lose, she turned to Elisha for help. Instead of performing a dramatic miracle, Elisha asked her a simple yet profound question. "What do you have in your house?" The widow replied that she had nothing but a small jar of oil. This seemingly insignificant item became the vessel for God's miraculous provision. Elisha told her to gather as many empty vessels as she could from her neighbors and pour the oil into them. Imagine her surprise as the oil flowed steadily from the small jar, filling each vessel to the brim. She poured and poured, each jar filled to the top, and still the oil kept flowing. It wasn't until all the vessels were filled that the oil stopped. Elisha instructed her to sell the oil, pay her debts, and use the remainder to provide for her family. What is striking about this miracle is that it wasn't a grand spectacle. No thunder or lightning, no angels or fire from heaven. It was a quiet act of faith, a simple exchange between a prophet and a widow in need. Elisha didn't tell her to perform any rituals or perform a certain act of worship. He asked her to trust in God with what she already had. This moment teaches us something profound about God's provision. Sometimes we wait for a miracle to come in the form of something dramatic or monumental, but God often works through the small things, the everyday things we may overlook. That small jar of oil was the key to restoring this woman's life. This quiet miracle also demonstrates the power of obedience. The widow's faith wasn't in her own abilities, but in her willingness to obey Elisha's instructions. She didn't question, she didn't hesitate. She trusted God and acted. And in return, God multiplied what she had, providing not only for her immediate needs, but for her future as well. When we face financial struggles or feel like we have nothing left, we need to remember this story. God can take the small things in our lives, those things that seem insignificant or inadequate, and use them to bring about extraordinary results. All it takes is faith and obedience. 6. Elisha's quiet miracles, healing, and restoration. Elisha's ministry wasn't marked by loud displays of power, but rather by quiet acts of restoration that brought healing to broken lives. One of the most poignant examples of this was his encounter with the Shunammite woman. This woman, though wealthy and well-established, had a deep sadness in her heart. She had no son, and when Elisha passed through her town, she recognized the power and holiness in him. She urged him to stay at her home, and each time he passed, he did so. Eventually, Elisha asked her, "What can I do for you?" She expressed that her greatest desire was a son, but it seemed an impossible hope, considering her age and circumstances. Elisha prophesied that by the same time the following year she would bear a son. The woman was overwhelmed, and though she had doubted such an incredible promise, God honored Elisha's words. A year later, she cradled her son in her arms, but the story doesn't end there. As the child grew, one day, while working in the fields with his father, he suddenly cried out, "My head! My head!" He fell unconscious and died in his mother's arms. In grief, she laid him on Elisha's bed, went to find the prophet, and in her sorrow asked, "Did I ask you for a son, my lord? Did I not tell you, 'Don't raise my hopes'?" Elisha's response was calm but firm. He followed her back to the house and went into the room where the child lay. He prayed earnestly to God, then laid himself upon the child, mouth to mouth, hands to hands, until the warmth of life returned. The child sneezed 7 times and opened his eyes. This miracle wasn't just about raising a child from the dead, it was about God's faithfulness in the most desperate moments. It was a reminder that God's presence, even in the face of death, brings life and hope. It wasn't the dramatic spectacle we sometimes expect, but the quiet, patient work of God through his servant Elisha. Elisha's life teaches us that miracles don't always come with a loud bang. Sometimes they're found in the stillness of faith and obedience. God often works through the smallest acts, whether it's a widow's oil, a barren woman's womb, or the breath of life restored to a dead child. Elisha's quiet miracles remind us that even in our darkest moments, when all seems lost, God's presence is there, bringing healing, restoration, and hope. How many times have we overlooked the quiet miracles in our own lives? We often wait for dramatic signs, but God is always at work, even in the small, hidden moments. 7. The legacy of Elisha, even in death. Elisha's legacy wasn't just built on the miracles he performed during his life. His true impact extended far beyond his death. Even after his passing, Elisha's influence continued to bring life and restoration, proving that God's power is not bound by time or death. After Elisha died, Israel fell into turmoil. Kings turned away from God, and the nation faced threats from their enemies. One day, some Israelites were burying a man when they saw a band of Moabite raiders approaching. In a panic, they hastily threw the dead man into Elisha's tomb. But what happened next was nothing short of miraculous. As the man's body touched Elisha's bones, the man came to life and stood up on his feet. Imagine that moment. No prayer, no rituals, just the body of Elisha, now lifeless, but still carrying the power of God's Spirit. This unexpected miracle confirmed that Elisha was not just a prophet for his time, but a vessel of God's eternal power. Even after death, Elisha's life continued to speak of God's greatness, a reminder that the Spirit of God cannot be contained by the grave. This story is a profound statement about the eternal nature of God's work. Elisha's bones didn't just lie in a tomb, they became a conduit of God's power, bringing life to someone who had no hope. His death didn't mark the end of his mission. It was another chapter in the ongoing story of God's work through his faithful servants. Even in death, Elisha's ministry did not stop. He kept giving life. This miracle calls us to reflect on the legacy we are leaving behind. It challenges us to live so fully for God that our influence outlasts us, just as Elisha's did. How are we impacting the world? Are we living in such a way that even after we're gone, God's Spirit will continue to work through the lives we've touched? Elisha's life, filled with miracles both big and small, reminds us that God's power transcends life and death. It teaches us that obedience, humility, and faithfulness can leave a legacy far beyond what we can imagine. Conclusion. Elisha's story is a powerful reminder of how faithfulness to God can leave a lasting legacy. His life wasn't about seeking recognition or performing dramatic acts. Instead, it was about quiet obedience, serving others, and trusting that God would work through him in ways both seen and unseen. Even after his death, Elisha's legacy continued to bring life, proving that God's work doesn't stop when our time on earth ends. The miracles Elisha performed, whether in healing, provision, or resurrection, show us that God is deeply concerned with every aspect of our lives, both the grand and the small. Elisha didn't wait for a stage. He brought healing to a widow, he purified water, and he even raised a dead man through his bones. This teaches us that God's power isn't about the magnitude of the act, but the heart behind it. Elisha's story calls us to live out our faith with quiet but persistent obedience, seeking to serve God and others in whatever capacity we can, trusting that even the smallest acts of faith can leave an eternal impact. We may never perform grand miracles, but we can make a difference by living faithfully in the ordinary moments of life. If Elisha's story has touched you, think about the ways you can make a lasting impact through quiet service. Share this video with someone who needs encouragement to live faithfully, no matter how small their acts may seem. How are you choosing to serve God and others today? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more stories that inspire. Let's continue to walk in faith together.